Welcome back, Inebri-art. Today, it's been a while since we've had a filmmaker on the show, but I met today's guest at one of our pop-up art shows, and we got to talking. And he's like, "Do you have filmmakers on?" And I'm like, "Yeah, of course." And so I was immediately like, "Let's get you on." Um, Alex Eaves has got two films under his belt: "Reuse Because You Can't Recycle the Planet," which was 2015, and then the box truck film. Um,
Yeah.
b- Building a reuseful, is that was that
Oh yeah, that's a word we made
okay?
up.
Okay, I wasn't sure if that was my misspelling. Reuseful Home, which came out just a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
Um, and that's the one that struck my interest because you live in a like old U-Haul truck.
Yeah, 17-foot U-Haul box truck converted into a 98 square foot tiny house.
Jeez. But this all comes from like your stay vocal, which is about like reuse, reduce, and recycle kind of mentality. Which according to your website started in 2003. But
Mhm.
I feel like this is kind of something that you develop from childhood. Like
Oh,
what
totally.
like where did all of this start? Like what was
So I grew up the son of two collectors, one admitted, one unadmitted.
okay, yeah.
Mom doesn't like to admit it, but she does collect things. Um, and I grew up in a large house in Norwell, so not too far from Plymouth. And my dad was the type of guy who would take a lot of things in with the intention of reusing them,
Okay.
but not actually ever reusing them.
Hmm.
But he was the type of guy like, oh, I have that, or oh, I have this bag of broken, screws or loose nuts and bolts, whatever. And
Oh my
so,
God. My dad used to have coffee can after coffee can of nails and screws, and none of it sorted in any useful way, but he had all of it.
yeah, yeah, one of our online estate sales that we did when we sold the childhood home, literally one of the listings was called Table of Nails, and it was thousands and thousands of nails and cans on a table.
Yeah.
So, but very early on, so he was a mechanic and I grew up playing with Matchbox cars, and so I would go with him to like the hobby shop, Hobby Town in Braintree, Mass at the Plaza, if you've ever been
Oh
back in the
yeah, I
day.
remember that. Yeah.
Yep. And we would go downstairs because he knew the guy there, and he would get like returned cars or packages that were broken or cars that were broken, whatever. And he would get them at a discount. And it was like things that I was seeing, but I wasn't really like understanding,
Hmm.
you know? And then we would go home with these, and I did have some of the like Matchbox official play sets, but we would also make our own. So like take old shoe boxes or paper towel rolls, toilet paper rolls for tunnels and different things. So like very early on, I started seeing like, oh, we have this thing in the house. Let's turn it into something fun, and you're not going out and spending a bunch of money, you
Yeah.
know? And then the next big realization of that is when I started skateboarding at age 12. Being from Massachusetts, that like the skateboarding season is
Short.
not in November
Yeah.
to say April or so. It's not fun. But again, I had a big house that I grew up in, and one of the basements, because there were multiple basements, it's crazy. But it was pretty empty, so I made my own little mini skate park. I took my first ramp was two railroad ties, because who doesn't have railroad ties in their house?
Of course, yeah.
um, and then a door, and then an old street sign from a car accident, because my dad's a mechanic and he would get all this random car related stuff. And that was my first ramp. And then as I progressed in skateboarding, I took things out like the old dryer or a filing cabinet or a table and started using those. And it was this free reuse skate park, in my basement, and all my friends would come over, and it was great.
Oh, that's
And
funny.
then in my adult years, it's the t-shirt, situation. That's what really kickstarted that.
Yeah, you brought back a memory that I hadn't thought about in a long time. Was like one of my favorite. I was a big like GI Joe kid. Like I had all the GI Joes, and one of
Wait, hold
my
on.
yeah.
Did you have the aircraft carrier?
Okay, I had almost all the GI Joe. I did not
Okay, are
have
you
the
ready for this?
yeah.
I had two.
Shut up.
I had two because I got one. I'll always remember it was $110. And
Yep.
somehow, either through my paper route, combination saving my paper route money and family. But then my dad, a few years later, he's a car mechanic and he would always barter. So this is where I learned bartering too.
Yep.
Traded this guy for some work who had a car full of GI Joes and he had another aircraft carrier.
Oh, that's
So
awesome.
I was that weirdo.
That like I wanted that so bad, and in my parents' defense, there was nowhere to put it. It was like 6 foot long, you know.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was like I ended up getting one because I briefly owned a comic book shop, and I had one there.
Nice.
Um,
Nice.
but my favorite GI Joe accessory was a piece of styrofoam from I think it was a microwave or maybe a TV, and that was like their Arctic base, and it was like just the layout of it was perfect with all these little holes that kind of became like, all right, that's the mission command over here and the armory's over here, and I mean that was like I used that thing endlessly, which I'm
Yeah.
sure with the like, wow, we're gonna
So
spend $110 on something when you're playing with some styrofoam.
So now you're bringing up a memory I haven't thought of in a while. We had an empty fish tank because we couldn't keep fish for the, long term. We had an empty fish tank and it still had the rocks and everything. And so I took all of my water GI Joe guys like Beachhead, the
Yep.
water moccasin, different things, and set up a whole water scene.
Oh, that's awesome.
So, and again, like making like a play set, you
Right.
know?
And
And these days, people get paid sponsorship money to like do those toy layouts on Instagram.
oh yeah, that's right. Yeah, they do all sorts of stuff. I've seen like people do like crazy photos and stuff. That's so funny. Um, so so you mentioned the t-shirt brand, and you're
Yeah.
basically taking old t-shirts and silk screening them with new images, and um I very much love going to like a thrift store and getting there used to be a great thrift store in Cambridge, Una's Experience
Oh,
Clothing.
it's still there.
Is it still there?
Yeah. The by the pound, the garment district. Is
Oh no, this one
that what
was
you're thinking of?
no, it was called Una's Experienced Clothing.
Oh,
And
okay. All right.
yeah, I mean I remember I got all sorts of weird like a Wells Fargo jacket, and which is something that I realized after because I bought it because I'm like, oh, that's a weird kind of it looked quasi military like, but it's for the armored truck. And I almost had someone let me into like they're like, oh, are you here for the deposit? I'm like, no, I'm not. No, I don't
Right.
don't help me rob you.
Right. Yeah. For real.
Yeah. So when did you decide to kind of make this into like video projects?
Well, let me just give you because we also have a very shared interest in music.
Mm-hmm.
And background. So I just got to give you that piece of it too, because it's interesting. So I actually started my brand as a skateboard company in 2003. So what happened is I was doing merchandise for political punk bands like Anti-Flag, Rise Against. I worked for 311 for a while,
Mm-hmm.
and I was very inspired by like these bands that were, trying to promote positive changes. And I had my second of now three skateboard related surgeries. And I'm like, let me do something that's not hurting me as much. So I was like, let me start my own skateboard company that's going to have all these positive messages on it. And I had lived in LA for a while, and I talked to my friend out there who worked at a pretty famous skate shop. and he put me in touch with the right guy. And that's when I found out how many thousands of dollars it takes to start a company.
Oh yeah,
And
yeah.
I was like, yeah, and you can't just buy like, oh, I'm gonna get 10 decks. It's
Yeah.
like you need to get 100 minimum in like multiple sizes.
And then if you want to make
So
money, you need like 500.
yes.
Yeah.
So I was like, all right, how can I raise money real quick to get this without spending a ton of money? And I was living in Pittsburgh at the time, and I was like, well, we have our screen printer in house, the guy who prints all of our shirts. Thrift stores sell t-shirts for just really cheap. Let me go buy a bunch of used t-shirts, really cheap, get a logo on them. And then I had the audience access because I was touring around the country at these concerts.
Yeah.
And then I started looking into textile waste at that point and started making these messages and selling them at the concerts. Unfortunately, the light bulb didn't go off right there. The light bulb that went off was, oh, okay, these sold out really fast. People are excited. Now I can use all that money to buy skateboards. They're going to sit and collect dust for years.
That
So,
sounds like a true entrepreneur.
yes.
Yeah.
So I started investing in the skateboards. It was a failed venture for 5 years, but throughout that time, the reuse piece was always there. Like I would make some reused t-shirts. I started making travel mugs or reusable shopping bags, and I just started getting really into the waste. And it was basically one incident, and I sound like a broken record because I talk about this all the time, but it was so impactful. Basically, the band that I was working for, we ordered these t-shirts. They were printed incorrectly. There was and it wasn't anything bad. The artist didn't want it. And I'm like, okay, I get it.
Yeah.
And that's when I found out that when a band, one band on one day, they don't want their shirts, they were going to have us ship them back from Pittsburgh all the way to Oakland, California to
Mm-hmm.
destroy them.
Yep.
And I'm like, okay, that's a mind blown. Like, I can't let that happen. I started thinking about all the money and the resources. So I ended up buying those shirts at a discounted price. So the merchandise company didn't lose their shirt over it. The
Yeah.
band got the new shirts that they wanted. And then I hired my mom to sew patches over the original design. So I had new reused shirts for my brand. And that was like the real game changing moment when I started really looking at, like, okay, if there's waste here, what about there and there? And then I started thinking about the Super Bowl teams, because they print both winners
Yep.
and the
Yeah.
World Series and uh
Yeah.
so
It's amazing like how much goes unused or wasted. And I just thought there's a company. I think I might be getting this wrong. I think they're called like Ugly Fruit or something like that. And it's like a subscription box, and it's all the fruit that is perfectly fine to eat.
they
It's
don't
just
look
it
perfect.
just doesn't look perfect. And it's like
Right.
I would do the same thing. Like if I go to buy an onion, I'm not going to buy the one that's weirdly shaped. I'm going to buy it. And it's just kind of that weird human nature that you don't even stop to think about the how much
Yeah,
just
I
goes.
I was actually just telling my niece today about, are you familiar with the Daily Table in Boston?
Why? I think so. It sounds super familiar.
It's one of the founders of Trader Joe's, and he started this for, like, low income families and everything. It's food that's perfectly fine.
Yep.
Some of it's weird looking, or like, it's like packages that like might be a week or two past the best by date,
Yep.
but which we all know at this point is kind of a joke. Like you can
Oh
keep
yeah.
soup or whatever for years. So it's just great that those things exist.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um is the so when you look at stuff out and about in the world, is there something that you see where you're like, oh, I'm gonna come up with something for reusable these stupid Stanley cups that everyone's buying for crazy money, or like, is there something that you just like see where you're like, okay, that is kind of like the next thing that I'm gonna focus on trying to like reuse?
Well, so I definitely used to do that, and that's where I lost my focus because I would either I would hear a message or like see something or like meet a new band that I was working with. Oh, we have to collaborate. Let's make travel mugs, or let me
Yeah.
do a shirt, that benefits this nonprofit organization. And it basically took me up until this past year, like 19 years, to realize that like making merchandise is not my main thing. Mine is more, I call it edutainment.
Hmm.
So I focus on like my films and doing talks and education, awareness, connecting people, and connecting people to like the real artists and the real makers and stuff. Because like yes, I make t-shirts and some of them have sold well and things like that, but like my big thing is my voice and what I'm trying to do.
And I mean, right now is like the perfect time for that. There's so easy to get a message out to people with the different, you know, social media. Social media is so terrible and so good all at the same time,
Mm-hmm.
and just, I mean, I was watching last night before I went to sleep. I was watching people who were like homesteading and raising their own chickens and trying to preserve the food they grew themselves and stuff like that. And I find that stuff endlessly fascinating. And
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. The
it's
only problem with social media, and it's why like I'm starting to like I use it to promote my website and I don't stay on there long.
mhm.
It's so fleeting.
Yes,
Like yeah, you're into the homesteads now, but are you gonna even remember that in a week?
yeah,
Do you know what I mean? Like we'll see things so fast and it's like, oh, this is awesome, but like with the exception of a few things here and there that like really struck a chord, like are we getting that much out of it? So that's why like I've been focusing more on like blogs and movies that, on my website where the new Facebook algorithm is not going to affect,
right,
you
right,
know.
yeah, and that's
Like my blogs will always be there if people choose to go,
mhm.
but if somebody's going on Facebook, like you know how it is. You've been around for a while. Like you saw Facebook 10, 15 years ago when people actually saw your posts. Now
uh
it's just
yeah,
here's ads.
the issue I'm running into right now is if I make more than one post, it somehow trips something and I get notification. We think your account's been hacked, and then I have to like change my password and relog into every. And it's been like that way for the past couple of days, and I know that eventually it'll get fixed, but there's nothing you can do about it. You just have to like wait it out, and it sucks.
Yeah.
I hate it. Hate it.
I can't I went through some rebranding this year over the past few months. I can't even change the name of one of my pages currently.
Oh,
They're like,
really?
that's not accepted. Yeah, and I'm like, but that's
Yeah.
and I see people do this all the time, and so I've just kind of given up because I feel, especially with Facebook pages, like nobody sees that stuff anymore.
Yeah,
Like,
I definitely feel like it is leaning towards, Instagram and TikTok. And I've said it on I just don't have time. I don't want to learn something new. Definitely
no,
don't feel like making videos. It's just like I don't have the brain capacity to deal with that shit now.
yeah,
But I did start to ask you about the films. So
yes,
um
sorry.
no, that's fine. That's these how these go. Um so you went from uh making those t-shirts in that moment, and then I mean obviously it's expanded to your actual home. So like
Yep.
how did that come about?
So, so basically what happened was in 2008, I made the complete switch of the brand from a skateboard company to a strictly reuse apparel brand.
Mm-hmm.
And I ended up winning an award that year. It was a Best Small Business Award. I won $20,000, which was
Nice.
amazing
That's awesome.
because it helped pay for a lot of that skateboard debt. But I was like, okay, I'm really making the right decision here with reuse. And just that incident led me to like do some speaking engagements for the first time at schools, and I started really enjoying that aspect of it. And so I would travel around the country because I was like dating somebody in California, but living in Mass. So I would spend time there. And then I moved to California, but I would still come back to Mass. And
Hmm.
I would do all these events all around. And finally, at some point, this somebody was just like, you should really make a TV show or a movie about reuse. Like, a lot of people, you're doing cool things. And I'm like, nah, you're crazy.
Yeah.
Um, and then that was around 2013, which is when kind of like Kickstarter was really, coming up. And I was like, maybe I could like do something interesting. And I was like looking into how to raise money to like travel around the country and share ideas. And then I'm like, well, if I'm going to travel around the country, I should probably film it.
Yeah.
I don't want to just travel and meet people and write a blog post or something. So I ended up raising the money through Kickstarter, and I sold one of those aircraft carriers, which I had the box for still. That helped pay for my first movie.
Did you cry?
No, I took a last photo. I set it up for a
Yeah.
display one last time, and I took a photo. If you go onto my Facebook and type in aircraft carrier, you'll
Yeah.
see it on somewhere on my page. But yeah, so then I traveled the entire contiguous US, so all 48 contiguous states, filming people that reuse in different ways. Um, and that film came out in 2015. And then, having learned from all the touring that I did with bands,
Hmm.
like the best way to get your message and your, product out there is hit the road. So as soon as that movie was done, I went on a 35-day tour, traveled around the country again, and I have a Pontiac Vibe, which you have seen. I still
Yep.
have it. And I was driving that around the country, sometimes sleeping in it. I had all my merch in it, and I realized like I'd really like to show people like how I live a reused lifestyle, because it's like, okay, here's my reused glass or my vintage t-shirt or whatever, but like I want to show people the day to day, like
Hmm.
how I work, how I eat, you know. And I had connected with his name's Derek Diedrichsen, former WBCN DJ.
Yep.
Um, he is in Stoughton, and he's now a pretty well-known figure in the tiny house movement. He's got some books and YouTube channel, blah blah blah. So as soon as I came back from that trip, I was like, I need to do something bigger and better. I'm like, I read about these people at Northeastern. He and I both went to Northeastern. I'm like, we need to, and they had like a trailer with a tiny house in the back of a truck. And I'm like, maybe we could do something like that. And he's like, why don't we just turn a box truck into a house? And I'm like, oh my God. I'm like, that is the perfect thing for me, because go back at that point 16 years, and I toured with Green Day, Blink 182, Newfound Glory, Alkaline Trio at different times. And we would drive a Penske box truck,
Yep.
and half of the truck in the back was anti-racist action merchandise. It was a nonprofit I worked for. And then the front half of the truck, we had a mattress on the floor. And I remember being in the truck like, man, imagine if you could like actually live in a truck or like cook a meal in here.
Yeah.
And now here we are
Oh, that's funny.
20 something years later, and I'm doing that.
Yeah, it's such like a big movement now. And I actually got to interview someone not too long ago whose name is not going to come to me. But he did a documentary about people who live on board on ship on boats, and
Oh,
total
yep.
chance like meeting. He was traveling from like Boston to like Georgia or something on his boat, and he had engine trouble and had to pull into Plymouth. And he met someone I knew, and like, you need to interview this guy, and got to go on his boat. And I first heard it, and then you like on the boat, and you're like, I've lived in an apartment smaller than this. Like this is pretty okay. Like, and it's just what some people do with their tiny houses and their converted vans and whatnot. I mean, they look gorgeous.
Yeah. Yeah, but the boat houses are very similar to like what we've done in our, a
Mhm.
lot of the similar building styles and techniques for sure.
What's the biggest drawback? There's got to be something where you're like, ugh, I just hate.
So the only thing like if because it's my house, but it's also a mobile reuse education center. So like I
Mhm.
take it around to schools and I do events and businesses, organizations, and like it's a showpiece. Like I've literally had it's getting close to 20,000 people tour my house so far.
Oh,
So,
I can see that being a thing. Yeah,
well, so if it was only my house, I would
yeah,
have a way bigger bed.
yeah.
But we basically, the U-Hauls, they have that grandma's attic or mom's attic, whatever they're the
Oh, that
loft.
little,
And so,
yeah. Hmm.
so the bed is just a little bit bigger than that. And then I have like a bench couch that flips open in its storage, but it's also like a second bed. So they're both not super wide.
Yeah,
So that is definitely the tougher thing.
yeah. Interesting. Um,
Yeah.
so right before we started recording, you said you had done some sort of research, and there's a T-shirt. I'm
Hmm.
dying. I'm what? Because every once in a
So,
while you lean backwards, and I'm trying to like glimpse at what's on the shirt.
yep. Yeah, so when we met, you had told me, you're like, oh yeah, I've done this podcast and I interviewed so and so and D. Snyder and blah, blah. I'm like, all right, before I go on this podcast, let me listen to a few episodes to get his vibe and
Yeah,
whatever. So I was
and
scrolling
he
on
still came
Spotify.
on.
And yep, I'm
Yeah,
here. And I listened to the D. Snyder one, and then I was like, let me listen to like the most recent one. And I listened to the female singer.
okay.
Um, and then I also listened to the lady from Scream, the like
Oh, that
actor.
was yeah, that was from last year at our horror convention. There may have been several dozen beers. And so that I honestly I haven't even listened to that because I think I got called out of the room in the middle of it. Um and I think Mike finished that up for me. That's funny.
Okay.
I forgot all about that. Yeah.
So So then I was like, all right, let me see what if any of these late recent ones strike a chord. And I'm scrolling down, and I'm like, Ipecac Records.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
I am a massive Mike Patton fan.
I am too, and I constantly get PR stuff related to him because we
Yeah.
had a guitarist from one of his other bands. I'm so bad with recall. Scott something. Um, and anytime like I see his name in a PR, I'm always and I know he doesn't do press, but I always ask.
Right.
you
Right.
know, and it's just yeah, that was a fun one. And that
Yeah, so I listened. It's Greg Workman. Is that how you
yep,
pronounce his last name?
yeah.
Yeah. So I listened to that podcast, and I'm like, now I know what T-shirt I'm gonna wear when we record the podcast.
Ooh,
So
what shirt?
this is my best vintage shirt purchase ever. Both one of my favorite shirts, but also I think it was only 10 pounds. I got it in the UK. I have Faith No More,
Oh,
real
nice.
thing UK tour shirt from when the album came out.
Nice.
So yeah,
I
I think it was
saw them on that tour.
oh geez. Okay.
They were opening for Billy Idol, and it
Nice.
was right after Billy Idol hit his motorcycle accident. And there was that shirt, but with the U.S. dates. But then they had a shirt of the whole band in their underwear, and on the back in bright red letters it said "You fat bastard."
Yeah.
And so me and all my friends bought it, and like wore it to school the next day. And I was the only one that wasn't wearing like a jacket over it. And they're like, "You're gonna get in trouble. You're gonna get in so much trouble." No one ever said anything.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh
Oh, I know
man, that's
all.
a
Yeah.
throwback. I yeah, love them. I think Mike Patton is I don't want to say underrated because I feel like if you
Oh no, you can say that because he
well,
should be a household name for
but the,
his skill
that's the
level.
thing is I feel like if people know him, they're like, no, he's amazing. I just don't feel like he's in things that are generally approachable to people. You know what I'm saying? Like he
Yeah.
should be way more famous, but I feel like because he's so experimental, that it doesn't appeal to a lot of people. You know, you can't. It's not a lot of toe tappers and sing along songs and
No.
Mr. Bungle and you know.
That's why you gotta start him with the Lionel Richie cover.
Oh, that one's so good. Yes, yeah, and
Um, my favorite part of that podcast with Greg that you recorded was when he was telling the story about Mike at Warner Brothers Records, and he played him the first Phantom Oz album, and
yeah,
the president stopped it after like 20 seconds. He's like, I don't know what this is, but feel free to put it out yourself.
yeah. That's what I'm saying. Is like his stuff is so like every Mr. Bungle album. I don't even know if I'd call them concept albums, but each one has a so distinct vibe. You know,
Yeah.
um, like I love putting on Disco Volatile. I think that's the name of the
Disco
album.
Volante
Volante, thank you. Um, I love putting that on
has my
Hal.
favorite song on there.
I love putting that on Halloween. It to me it just has like a real Halloweeny weird vibe. But then
Yep.
some of the other ones are complete. It's he's just a master at what he does, and I don't see any other singer anywhere think about what microphone am I using for this part of this song. Not just
Yeah.
like I'm sure everyone has like, oh, I like the Shure, blah 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 blah, but like you'll see him switch out microphones and then use a gas mask with a microphone in it, and he just really, I feel like, pushes the boundaries of like what you would think someone, you know he's a musician with his voice, not just a singer. And
Yeah.
yeah,
It's funny too because growing
someday I'll
up,
get him on the
I
show.
started, yeah. For so long, like high school and college, I remember just because I'm a huge Bjork fan.
Yep.
And I just always remember like, oh my God, imagine if like the best male vocalist and the best female vocalist ever teamed up. It's gotta happen. It's gotta happen. And then it finally did. And I'm just like, the world is alive. Like I can't believe this is,
That's great.
Oh,
Yeah, yeah. He's I think once you start doing this seriously, you kind of think like, oh, who are the people that would be on my absolutely would love to get this. And to me, they're so personal. Like, sure, I'd love to have Tom Hanks, you know. But there's people who kind of, I've been thinking about a lot of this as I get older, like the people that I was exposed to through like pop culture that kind of made Andy, and like
mm,
there's like Bobcat Goldthwait. Like he's
mm.
on my top list. I find him fascinating. I think he's hysterically funny. I've loved his movies. I think he's kind of that subversive person that I'm kind of like, yeah, like I feel like he was a big part of me growing up, you know,
Yeah.
and and do you have like when you were making your movies, do you have those kind of people in mind that you're like, oh,
1020%. So when I made my first film, I was like, okay, the soundtrack has to be all the bands that I worked for or became friends with, whoever, whatever.
yeah,
And the biggest one of them, like as far as like record sale size or whatever is 311, and
Hmm.
I know like trying to get rights to their music, even though I know and friends with and have toured with them,
Yeah.
still like record label deal. But I specifically asked them if I could use one of their songs before they were signed because they have the full rights to that,
Oh,
you
okay.
know.
Yeah.
But I was able to get every single band that I wanted on there. So the Bosstones are on there, 311's on
Oh, nice.
there. Local bands, Two Skinny Jays, if you've ever heard of them out of New York.
No.
Um, yeah. You'd if you like 311 and like late 90s funky rap metal,
Oh,
Two
yeah. I
Skinny
love
Jays.
311. Yeah.
Okay.
You
Yeah.
just made me think of this completely unrelated, off the topic. Um, I was 4th of July. I was out with a friend, and we were kind of like bebopping around downtown, um, Plymouth, and we stopped in one of my favorite places to get cocktails called Honey Baby, and I know, I think he might be the bar manager there, and he was standing near the bathroom, and I had to go to the restroom, so I'm like, oh. I'm like, you're clearly waiting. And he's like, what? I'm like, you're kind of, doing the pee pee dance. He goes, oh, no. I was listening to Bosstones in my head and I was dancing. And it made me laugh so hard because I'm like, oh, I could see how I could confuse that. Sure.
While we're on the topic of the Bosstones, did you happen to watch my movie?
I have
The new
not.
one about the truck?
No, not yet.
Okay, I don't want to give it away,
Okay.
but their music is not in this film,
Okay.
but a physical piece of their history is in the film and in my house.
Oh, okay. Now I have
That's
to watch
all
it.
I'm gonna say.
Yeah. I apologize because I feel like I should have, but I've been so busy. Um, as I went to watch Godzilla -1. It took me
Okay.
four sittings to get through it, just because every time I put it on, I would start to nod off, and with it being in subtitles, I'm like, I
So
can't
it's
do.
that good?
Oh, it's really good. No, it is. It's really good. I wasn't nodding off because of the movie. It's just, you know,
Yeah.
when you're running your own thing and you're running all over the place, it's just, yeah, it's I missed a key plot point that I had to go back and be like, how did I miss that? I'm like, oh, I fell asleep at that point. But it's a
Yeah.
gorgeous movie. It's dark, it's brooding. I really liked it, but yeah, I'm not doing it
Nice.
favors saying I fell asleep during it 4 times, but that's a me thing, not the movie.
Right. I'm glad that we're having this talk and like talking about music and sidetrack because like that's a huge thing that I talk about all the time. Like when people hear the word like environmentalist or oh he's got a documentary or he works with reuse or he's vegan, there's such a stigma that it's going to be boring and
Yep.
unexciting and like everything has to be green and there's got to be leaves on it and but my thing is like reuse is something that we all do
Hmm.
like and it's something that like there's benefits that everybody can get from like with my first movie I literally filmed in 48 states and I was trying to find something for everybody. It's like there's something that people that for people that have like no money. There's something for the high end rich folks, that want to have a one of a kind piece of furniture
Hmm.
or just people doing it to survive. And like we don't have to be boring. Like the first time I ever did a talk, it was at a high school. It was at Bridgewater Raynham High and there was a guy talking up there and he had like a PowerPoint and literally kids like you at Godzilla
Nodding
were
off.
falling asleep,
Yeah.
sitting in school trying to like, and he's trying to talk to them about statistics and facts and whatever. But I'm looking and I'm just like, I need to bring what I learned from these, punk rock bands and heavy metal bands, rock bands on how to engage the crowd. And so I just went up there and used some techniques and I got the crowd and they really enjoyed it. I'm like, okay. And that's why I ended up coming up with this word edutainment because it's like yeah, I'm out here and I want to educate people on the benefits of reuse, but I
Hmm.
want to do it in a fun way. Like, I want people to know that this fucking awesome Faith No More t-shirt is helping the planet
Right.
because this is not something new that was made and cheaply sold on Etsy or something. This is a vintage, shirt that has lasted what 33 years now because the
Could
album
oh
came out in
don't start going
91.
to figure out how old it is. I don't like that. But no, it was interesting when you first came on. I said like, how did this start? And you're like, my parents were collectors, and it's like, yeah, I mean, if you told someone like, oh, I collect vintage T-shirts, they're gonna be like, oh, what's your favorite one? Oh, do you have concert? They're gonna have questions. But if you're like, I'm an environmentalist, they're like, oh, cool, like because it's that, oh, I'm gonna get lectured at, and it's
Yeah,
I mean, you're doing
no,
the same thing, like if you're like, oh, I filled my house with antiques, people are gonna be like, oh, that's cool. Tell me about this hutch or, armoire or whatever. But if you're like, I reduce, reuse, and recycle everything, people are gonna be like, oh, here we go.
right, right. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's why like, my brand right now is like not the main focus. Like I'm not focused on doing mail order, things like that, but it comes along with me wherever I go. And the main thing that I focus on is doing these one of a kind t-shirts. You saw some, I think,
Yep.
at the event
Hmm.
where I put my reuse slogan on top of shirts. And what I'll do is I'll just find unique shirts at thrift stores, put my logo on top of it because I want there to be something for everybody. So like, one time I found this really awesome Michael Jordan photograph shirt, and it was
Yeah.
him dunking, and the logo went on top of it, and it looked really cool. And I know for a fact that the guy who bought it was not some super passionate environmentalist. He was a
Right.
Michael Jordan fan that loved the shirt, thought it was cool, and he's the only one in the world with it.
Yep.
So there's a way that we can all work together. And I think that's like, on a deeper sentiment, like that's something that we have to all realize is we are here together. It's
Hmm.
better if we work together to figure ourselves out.
Yeah. No, I love that sentiment. Um, Alex, this has been a lot of fun. Like, I love talking to people my own age because then we can relate.
Right, right.
Sometimes I get too many young people in a row, and I just feel super old. Um, but no, this is great. So, where can people go to watch the movie, including myself? That I feel bad that I didn't do that.
So I am very happy to say that I have one website now that is the hub for everything that I do because I used to be like, which business card do I bring? Which site do I send them to? What shirts do I bring? So I am found now at escapethewaste.com.
Hmm.
And if you go to escapethewaste.com, you can find out about me, find out about my movies, find out about hosting an event with the tiny house, all sorts of things. Links to the shirts, everything.
Awesome. Are you traveling with the tiny house now? Because you're not in your tiny house.
No, I am. So currently, I am right over the Mass Pike in New York. I'm in New Lebanon, New York. My friend runs this amazing, ridiculous 85-acre animal sanctuary.
Oh, cool.
And oh, it's a great place. Like if you ever need to do a work vacation,
Yep.
meaning the heck out of your comfort zone and just be somewhere quiet.
Yep.
So yeah, there's yaks, goats, donkey, horse, cat house, a rabbit house,
That's awesome.
tons of frogs, lots of
Yeah.
frogs.
Oh, that's so cool. My son has told me he watches, there's like I think it's a Twitch streamer, and it's an animal sanctuary, and they stream from the animal sanctuary about like what's going on and the different animals that they don't, they call them ambassadors
Okay.
because they don't want to call them pets, and
Right.
whatever. So they call them ambassadors, and they're like, oh, we're getting, new ambassadors of this species, and we're building them out this new, enclosure, and they kind of like walk everybody through it, and it's just really,
So
it's just,
it's more people led than like it's not just like a camera
it's
in
not just a
the
camera. Yeah, yeah.
background.
At least that's my
Okay.
understanding. Is it's just, like they kind of walk you through, the day to day, like what they got going on, answer questions about the animals. And I know he's told me what it is, and I don't remember. I'm so bad with names. Like it's
Oh,
terrible.
Yep. I'm glad you remembered mine, but you probably have it pulled up on your
Have it
screen.
written
Yeah.
down.
That's all right.
And it's so fun. And that I told this, we just did our 400th episode. And
I because I listened to 399.
yep.
So, yep.
So that one comes out Monday. Yeah. And we talk about how we've done so many that come up as a memory, or I'll see one of the titles of it or something, and I'll see the name and I'll be like, who the hell is that? And I'll read the description. I go, I still don't know who that is. I don't remember talking to this person at all. And have to kind of go
Wow.
back and like go, oh, it's that. Like, it's just so, I mean, it's over 400 people. It just kind
Yeah.
of blends together after a while. And
I, something that I'm learning, because like I said, I literally have had 20,000 people or so in my house. So like our brains have to have some kind of limit. Like there's got to be like, okay, you're now on overdrive. You're not going to
yep.
remember the next 20 people.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. And I always tell people, I'm like, if you have a generic name like Mike, Dave, Bill, John, there's no way I'm remembering that. Like
No,
if you're like, oh, my parents named me Marshmallow, I'll be like, oh, I met this guy like that will stick in my head. But if
right,
you have a generic white guy name, forget it. It's gone.
right.
The second you say it's not going to happen. So,
Tony.
but I want to say thank you so much, man. It was a pleasure. It was a pleasure talking to you at our event. So I'm glad you came on to talk to us
Yeah,
here.
thank you very much for having me. It was
And
fun.
is there something simple that you can tell our listeners, like something like what's the easiest thing to reuse, like something they can do in their day to day, or just
I
start a
say this a
collection?
lot too, but like it's the easiest thing. Like if you're ever in need to buy anything, just look for a used option first. Like the amount of used versions of anything you want that are on eBay,
Yep.
like I haven't bought a new phone since 2006 because you can get a great pre-owned phone,
Yeah.
like it's all out there.
Awesome. Outstanding, man. All right. And listeners,
Cool.
we will be back again next week, I think, for episode 402. I'm not going to do this because my editor will inevitably move them around. But yeah, this was a lot of fun. And our listeners will be back again next Monday. And thanks for checking out the show today, listeners. If you enjoyed the content today, you can go over to patreon.com/Inebri-art to support the show. You can join over there for just a few dollars a month and help us provide this fun content that you just checked out. You can also email us at Inebri-art.com with your questions, complaints, and concerns, or you can find us on all social medias at Inebri-art or at Inebri-art6 on Instagram. And also don't forget to check out our other shows, Bar Talk Podcast, Old Colony Cast, Inebri-art, and all the other shows on the Inebri-art Network, which you can find at Inebri-art.com. Thanks again for listening.